How to create a refund in PPS. In this video, we will go through 4 different scenarios where a refund might be required and the process for completing a refund for each scenario. As with a few things in PPS, there can sometimes be a number of ways to access certain screens, but we will just be covering the most common and simplest way to achieve this here. That doesn't mean that an alternative method is wrong or won't work though. A client's account, including their invoices, charges, and payments, can be accessed a few ways. For example, via the account screen, the client log, or you can search specifically through the invoices or payments list. For the purpose of completing these refunds, we're going to be focusing mostly on the account screen and the various options that this screen provides to help you record your refunds. Another handy tip before we start processing the refunds is to get your system set up with a specific charge code and a payment method to use to identify your refunds. This will help you easily identify any invoices that have been refunded, and you can also use them to run specific reports on this method. First, you can add a new charge code by navigating to the Tools, Lookup Tables, and then select Standard Charges and Stock Items. Select Add and enter a description and a code that you can use to recognize for a refund. Save your changes, but stay in the lookup tables and navigate to Payment Methods. And again, select Add and enter a payment method that you would use to identify for a refund. You can also add another payment method here for bad debt, as that will be used in the first scenario for refunds that we will be going through next. Now that you're all set up, we can have a look at each of the scenarios for creating a refund. So the first scenario that we will look at is if there is an unpaid invoice that needs to be refunded and the full value removed from the account balance for this client. This is also known as writing off bad debt. To start, open the account screen for the relevant client and locate the invoice in question. This will be an invoice showing in orange, as it should not, in this scenario, have a payment associated to it. Double-click to open the invoice. Select the Refund button, and you will then be asked if you want to credit the invoice. Raising the credit will cancel out the unpaid invoice amount, essentially removing it from the account balance, so click Yes here to continue. This will create a new invoice with a negative value that will be the same as the amount of the unpaid invoice. You will see this message asking if you want to print the credit note, and this can be done now or at a later date by opening the negative value invoice from the account screen. The credit entry will also appear on the statement of accounts when it's prepared. Once this process is complete, you can look at the account screen again and you will find the original unpaid invoice now marked as paid, with the new credit invoice and the negative charge here too. There will be a payment then showing with the credit invoice to balance the accounts. The second scenario that we will look at is if you have an invoice that has been fully paid, but you need to refund this client in full. The payment can be fully refunded or left as credit on the account as part of this process. Again, open the account screen for this client and locate the invoice in question. This invoice will have a payment associated to it, so should be showing in purple in the list. Double-click the invoice to open it again and select the Refund button. You will now be asked if you want to refund the fully paid invoice, and you can select Yes to continue. This will raise a negative value invoice for the amount of the fully paid invoice, and next you will be presented with the screen to issue the invoice. If you're going to be refunding the client's payment, you can then choose to associate a payment to the negative value invoice that has been raised. This will record that invoice has been refunded and the client credited the selected amount. Enter the date of the refund and the method of payment, and you can then close the screen. Alternatively, if you close the screen here without entering any payment details, then the negative value invoice will be left unpaid and the total of the refunded invoice will appear as credit on the account. This credit can then be allocated to a future invoice. The third scenario that we will look at is if you have an invoice that needs a partial refund. You might need to refund an unpaid invoice if a mistake was made and you don't want to delete the invoice or make a change to edit it. But occasionally, you may have an invoice that has been part paid already that you need to refund just a part of. The refund button in the invoice can only be used to refund a balance in full. So if you need to create a partial refund for an invoice that has been fully paid or part paid, this will need to be done a different way. To start, open the account screen for the relevant client and double-click to open the invoice in question. At this point, you might need to untick the button to unissue the invoice. Then select Charges and create a new charge to add to this invoice. Now you need to add a negative charge for the amount that you need to refund the client. You can select the same charge type as originally charged for this invoice, or you can use a specific refund charge code here. When an invoice is overpaid, all payments are removed and will need to be reallocated correctly again. To sort the payments, you first need to add a new payment to this invoice. This will need to be a negative value payment for the amount you are returning to the client. Add this payment and then select the Payments button again and select an existing payment to allocate to this invoice. Here you select the original payment and now that should fully balance the accounts. And the final scenario that we will cover is how to refund in part or in full a payment that is currently showing as credit on the account. To do this, navigate to the client's account screen again and select the icon in the top to record a new payment. Enter the amount that you want to refund as a negative value, for example, -10 to refund £10. Also add how the money will be refunded and the date and any additional details required. This will record the negative payment on the account. The account balance will now be correct, but you will have the negative payment showing in green on the account. You can leave it like this, or you can allocate it to an existing invoice if you want all records completed in purple. To do this, you will need to select the payment associated to one of the invoices, double-click to open it, and then unallocate this payment from the invoice. Then double-click to open the invoice again and select Payments. Here you can select an existing payment to allocate to this invoice. First, select the new negative payment and repeat the process to then select the original payment to allocate it to this invoice, which will balance the accounts. We do hope that helps you sort any refunds you might need to do in the PPS system, but if you have any other questions, pop over to our knowledge base at ppssupport.com, or you can contact our support team by popping an email over to support@rushcliffe.com. Thank you for listening.